the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you're answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
So thank you, Hybrid. Thank you so much for having me. I've sat through so many of these, so I'm really excited to be able to present at one of them finally. So as Dib said, I'm Catherine Ruiz. I am the Senior Specialist of Corporate Social Responsibility at Columbus McKinnon. And I'm here to talk to you about what corporate social responsibility looks like at a public company, and then what working in CSR may look like for you. So all the information that I'm going to present today is public and can be found in our Corporate Social Responsibility Report on our website. So Dibs did give an introduction on all about me, but I'll go through it a little bit again. So I got my bachelor's in environmental science from Binghamton University. I graduated from there in 2019. And then after I went straight into my master's here at Stevens in the sustainability management program. I graduated from there in 2021. So Jack and I were both part of the COVID class during our second semester. We went fully remote. I also did my graduate certificate in environmental management at the same time. And then I spent a year working without school, but I'm now back doing my MBA part-time at UNC Charlotte. And I live in Charlotte now. So while I was doing all that school, I was really fortunate to have a lot of work experience to help me figure out kind of what I wanted to do with my career. It was much windier than this path may show. So I began college. I was doing research in a lab studying invasive species. It was a great experience, taught me nothing can be more tedious than looking at thousands of tiny little balls under a microscope, hoping for a hole. But it helped me decide I did not want to do scientific research forever, like I went into college thinking. So during the summer of my junior year, I worked at the Holden Arboretum in Ohio, studying forest management practices, which was fun because I got paid to go hiking every day. But it was more experience confirming I wanted something different for my life. So I applied to Stevens, hoping that they could help me figure it out. So during my second semester at Stevens, I started an internship with STV. Dibs was able to make a connection for me on that. So that's really how I feel like my career started. I started there as their sustainability and resilience intern. So I helped do research on flooding prevention measures for living in a post-Sandy New York, and then helped build what was going to be the foundation for their first CSR report. But then a month and a half into my internship, COVID began, so we went remote and a lot of projects got put on hold, including mine. So when that internship ended, at the end of the semester, I interned with the New Jersey Economic Development Authority on their offshore wind manufacturing site that they're building. So it was really great exposure working for a government agency, but it helped me realize what I wanted to do, which was go back to the non-government corporate type of world and work with CSR reports. So I did. I applied to a few dozen internships and landed one at Columbus McKinnon. So I was an environmental sustainability intern helping to manage the environmental data that was going to go into their first CSR report. But it really quickly turned into so much more. And that's what I'll spend this presentation talking about. So once I graduated from Stevens, I 3 days later started full-time as their first sustainability specialist. And then I was promoted to the Senior Specialist of Corporate Social Responsibility to take on a broader role and more responsibilities, which is where I'm at today. So I do want to explain a little bit about Columbus McKinnon first. So we are a publicly traded industrial products manufacturing company. So we manufacture things like overhead cranes, manual hoists, conveyors, chains. We like things that move. So I say every time you go to a concert or a sporting event, you look up and anything's from the ceiling, you'll see a black box. We make that black box. So we're a family of brands that has grown tremendously through acquisitions. So you may recognize some of the brands under the Columbus McKinnon umbrella. We've been around for almost 150 years, so it makes us well trusted and in a lot of industries. And we have over 3,300 employees operating across 26 countries, and I do work with each country and each site individually. So what is CSR and why does it matter? So to me, corporate social responsibility is a combination of managing risks and value creation by mitigating risks and leveraging opportunities through environmental, social, and governance measures. Stakeholder capitalism is the what we're trying to achieve, since it's the long-term value creation by taking into account the needs of all stakeholders and society as large. Corporate social responsibility programs are the how we accomplish those goals, and ESG is the structure in which we break down CSR into the components to evaluate where we should focus our resources. So the school of thought that companies exist to make money for the owners and their shareholders only has been around forever. And today it's still true, but it's only been that more recently companies have realized the importance of benefiting all the stakeholder groups. So corporate social responsibilities programs help companies to focus on the purpose beyond profit. ESG allows us to be very intentional and methodical about how we allocate our resources, making CSR, which is the high level, broad, and often vague concept, much more tangible. This has even become so important in the last few years that the SEC has started to require and regulate certain environmental and social disclosures. So for a public company, like we are, we're traded on NASDAQ. We have 5 main stakeholder groups, which are employees, customers, shareholders, communities, and the environment. So we have to keep in mind all of them when we're making our decisions. The long-term value creation that we focus on, we use our strengths or develop new competencies to create strategic advantage for the business and for all of our stakeholders. This can include financial and non-financial gains, such as reputation, community impact, financial gains, stock price, environmental impact, just to name a few. But there's also a big focus on enterprise risk management. A comprehensive risk management process should take into account everything that could be a risk to the organization. So companies perform materiality assessments to identify the most relevant ESG risks and opportunities and spend years putting together action plans and initiatives to manage these risks and capitalize on these opportunities. Some of these risks, again, can include reputation, operational risks, supply chain risks, climate, energy, and environmental risks, regulatory requirements, and more. So now that you know what my company does and what drives us, as well as my job, I'm going to go more into depth on the high-level responsibilities I have. Saying I work in corporate social responsibility doesn't mean people are always going to understand. So I always have to go more in depth on what I do. So these are the 6 main things I describe my job as. They're not the only things I do, but they're the main ones and the ones that you may see at other jobs and other public companies. The first is preparing for the CSR report. The report's the perfect platform to explain how ESG risks and opportunities are managed. Companies also use it to brag about what great things they and their employees are doing, since information like that may not always fit well into other annual reports, or all stakeholders might not look to the proxy statement or the 10K for certain information. So this means it could be housed here, and most companies have been recently. For preparing the CSR report, it really begins with the materiality assessment. You have to be transparent about your processes and how to choose which ESG areas to focus on. To do this materiality assessment, you have to engage with different stakeholder groups through methods that work for each of them to understand what's important to them. So this can include everything from doing one-on-one interviews, sending out surveys, looking at research, or talking to industry peers to see what stakeholders are mentioning. So at McKinnon, we use this information from the groups to map out where they should fall based on by placing the importance to external stakeholders on the y-axis and what's important to the business on the x-axis. So these include both risks and opportunities, and a lot of research and conversation goes into developing this. So everything that falls in the outer loop becomes the material topics for the year. So these areas have the greatest opportunity for value creation, have a high risk level, and or based on the relevance to the business strategy. Oops, sorry. Okay. So once the list of topics is compiled, you have to have conversations with everyone who should be involved with the management of it to find the value creating opportunities or ways to minimize the risk. CSR is so cross-functional, so forming partnerships and educating your company on why these sorts of analysis and initiatives are taking place is absolutely necessary. You have to develop the initiatives in partnership with the relevant departments, not separately on your own. If working in CSR, you're not going to be an expert in every part of the business. So it's really important that you are making those partnerships, so that you have the cybersecurity experts, the supply chain experts, your people understand, know why you're doing it, why you need the support for it, and why they should be personally invested for it as well. So we use the report to specifically talk about our management approaches for the material topics and how the different departments are working together to minimize the risk and create value. Throughout the report, everything from new initiatives, process improvements, and fun things we've done for the year are talked about. So I view it as a big recap on what the company has accomplished for the year. So on the left are some of the key organizational events that took place during fiscal year 2022, including acquisitions, launching our company purpose statement, and collecting our scope 3 baselines. So CSR reports tend to be more backwards looking, recapping on what has happened more so than what is going to happen. I spend a lot of time looking through other reports to see what other people are doing for benchmarking, and I will say that is definitely a common theme, but it does depend on the company. So reports can include forward-looking information. So these are things like what you plan to do, continuing off of things that you finished in the previous year, or how you plan to achieve certain targets. So on the right are some of our environmental targets that we have out publicly right now. So like I said, there's a lot of benchmarking that goes into developing the first report to make sure you have the right and enough quantitative and qualitative metrics. So using reporting frameworks and industry best practices helps make a comprehensible and comparable report. It also helps to have a strong peer group to compare what they're reporting on to what you're thinking about reporting. And this spans across all areas of the organization, not just environmental targets and data. But some of the really common frameworks that are used are GRI, SASB, and TCFD. But I will expand on these later on in the presentation on why each of them are different and why they might apply to you. So at the end of the fiscal year, every April, we write about all of this information. And basically each material topic has its own header in the report. So this is our past year's report where we keep all of this information, and it's posted on our website for everybody to see and use going forward. We not only publish our CSR report, but we also put metrics into our proxy statement in a fact sheet format. So governance is the management of risks and opportunities. So we put our key metrics in our governance document. We focus on the key metrics that shareholders may be looking for in the proxy so they can find a bunch of information all in the same spot. The CSR report and the proxy statement are both public documents for all of our stakeholders to see what we've been working on and any valuable data that they might be needing. Some companies have fully integrated reports where all of their ESG information lives within the annual reports. Currently, it's really up to the company on what they want to do and where they want to put the information, but future regulations may impact where this information is housed. So for the report, there's a lot of data management that needs to be done. This is what I was hired to do as an intern, and it's still a very large part of my job. And the bigger the company, the more global the company, the more complex the data is to manage. I have to do a lot of standardization across 20 to 26 different countries between currencies. Some people measure things in liters, some people measure them in pounds, things like that goes into this. I truly live by what gets measured, gets managed. So metrics and KPIs are really important for me and also for framing any good strategy, regardless if it's for CSR or not. You need to be able to track progress over time, and KPIs help you do this. So for me, one of the reasons I love working at a mid-sized company is I get to be involved with the E, S, and G data. At large companies, it's typical that you're hired and you only manage one sort of data set, but I like being involved with all of them. So just to break it down, because there is a bunch, we'll simplify it and start with environmental. So I bet most of you in this program, if you do go into corporate social responsibility, you will be working with environmental data. So there are many different ways you can collect the data and what data you're collecting. It can be through Excel files or software. So at Columbus McKinnon, we have data owners at each site that are responsible for reporting the data to me through a software. And then from there, it may need to be standardized depending on the location for the company. To determine what metrics are relevant for you, looking at your industry peers will help you decide best what metrics to use, and then also what units to report them in. Again, you're reporting this information to make it comparable for your stakeholders. So you want to make it simple and say metric tons to metric tons, things like that. So at the end of the year, I take all of the energy data, all of the waste data, normalize it, analyze it, and then we report out on it. And then I take all of the energy data and I use it to calculate our scope 1 and 2 greenhouse gas emissions. It's not as scary as people think, because there are a lot of sources of data out there to help with these emission calculations, including the EPA. So for scope 1, for a manufacturing company, is typically your natural gas usage, your propane, your heating oil, and then gasoline and diesel used from company vehicles. So on the EPA's website, as well as many others, they give you the conversion factors. So as long as you sum up all of your organization's usage to the unit that source is giving you, you can easily calculate the carbon dioxide equivalent, which is the most common way to present your emissions. So if the source you're using gives you the emissions factor by individual greenhouse gas, so they list CO2, CH4, N2O, just make sure if it's giving you the global warming potential. This was one that I learned that caused me a lot of stress figuring out when I was doing this for the first time. So it just is a way that it normalizes all to sum up into CO2e. So if it doesn't, you can very easily search what the global warming potential factor is for each of them, and then you multiply that into the equation. For scope 2, electricity, the EPA, again, they give you these emission factors and the sources of energy. So how much renewable energy is in it, how much is hydrogen, or how much is hydro, like how much is nuclear, how much is coal, how much is gas. They provide all of this. All you have to do is type in the zip code for your location, and they'll give you all the information as well as emission factors for it. But that is for the US. So if you're because the grid energy does vary by emissions based on your region, whereas natural gas, propane, it stays pretty consistent depending on no matter where you're using it. Electricity does vary by region. So if your organization is global like ours, there are other sources that provide this information on a country by country level, or some energy providers may even provide what your CO2e per kilowatt hour is in your invoices. So there's lots of ways you can get this information. As long as you disclose it, saying that you got it from this source or you got it directly from your energy provider, it's whatever works. Just be transparent about your processes. So like I said, it seems and sounds very complex, but as long as you have the right processes in place and disclose them, it becomes pretty simple. There's also a lot of softwares out there that all you do is type in your energy's consumption, and it will do all of the calculations for you. Another huge thing that we undertook last year was calculating our Scope 3 greenhouse gas emissions, which are the emissions from everything like your products, your employee commuting, the distribution and transportation of your products, materials used, the emissions of consultants that you may use. It's everything else but what fits into Scope 1 and 2. And right now it's currently largely based on assumptions, which can make it difficult for people to understand as well as to set reduction targets too. So McKinnon partnered with a third party on this calculation because it's so complex and the data can be difficult to get a hold of. It is not as straightforward and simple as doing your Scope 1 and 2, which is why you don't see a lot of companies doing it. And like I said, it is heavily based on assumptions. So there are concerns from companies who don't report on it because of the inaccuracies that come with all of the assumptions. But if you are transparent about your processes and your data sources, then that's what you can do. And that's kind of the industry expectation right now. The last environmental data that I work with mainly is working with our finance team. We have all of our sites report how much of their capital expenditure projects include a sustainability component of them. So last year we had 10% of all of our capital expenditure projects contain a sustainability component. There are also so many social and governance metrics that can be tracked. So some that we report on are our community involvement, our diversity, equity, and inclusion, health and safety, training and development, engagement survey results, non-compliance and anti-corruption. So these are just a few areas that I partner with our other departments on to get the data on. It's so important to focus on reporting metrics that add value and that you be consistent year over year so that the data can be compared. Companies whose metrics don't increase or decrease in the direction that they want may be hesitant to report on this, but my advice is to do it. I hear it a lot in conferences saying it's better to report it and show that you didn't make the progress you were hoping for or you didn't meet the target than it is to say nothing, because then your stakeholders get to decide what it means. Whereas you get to control the conversation when you say, well, we were just short of this, but this is what we're doing to really make sure we can try and meet it next year. So it's better to say it than make it seem like you're hiding information. The next is long-term strategy. So long-term strategies focus on the initiatives, the controls, and the risk management practices put in place for the determined material topics. To build a good strategy, you have to start with a good foundation. So ask yourself, what are we being required to do? And then make sure you're in compliance with those. This stage is always going on in the background since new regulations are always coming out and others are being updated, but I think it is the best first step for your strategy. One of the big ones that has a lot of companies scrambling right now are the proposed SEC regulations on climate disclosure. So many companies are working and definitely scrambling to prepare for the proposed SEC regulations on mandatory climate disclosures. A lot just don't have the processes in place to be collecting this data from all of their sites. So it was first announced in March and is going through final review and really has companies pressured to find knowledgeable talent. The regulation is potentially going to make certain disclosures required in financial reports, which are subjected to external auditing. So this means those processes and controls have to be in place and be standardized throughout the company. The first main component is reporting on financial impact from climate-related impacts and the expenditure dollars being invested to mitigate those impacts. Companies may also have to disclose how climate-related impacts are impacting financial estimates and assumptions. There's a lot of financial resources invested into financial predictions, and companies would have to explain how they're adjusting their models to adapt to climate-related impacts. Companies are starting to disclose scope 1 and 2 emissions, but many still don't. This requirement will require companies to disclose what their scope 1, 2, and 3 emissions are, which is not an easy task that can be done overnight. I have seen personally since March a significant increase in the number of companies hiring sustainability managers, positions for climate reporting, and other titles like that, because there hasn't historically been a lot of investment in talent growth in these areas. So you're all in a fantastic position in this program if you want to go into that type of career. There is a phased approach for reporting the different scopes, with scope 3 being required the last, mainly because of the amount of resources that have to go into it. So under the current proposal, companies would only have to disclose their scope 3 if it's material, which it is for almost every company, or if they set a scope 3 reduction target or goal. Scope 1 and 2 will require limited assurance, which is received through third-party verification, which is where they go through your processes, look at your calculations, make sure everything is right, and then eventually lead to reasonable assurance, which is way more intense. So when these rules are finalized, I also expect a lot of new job postings for consulting companies that work on verification and reasonable assurance as well. The next four proposed requirements can be thoroughly prepared through TCFD, which is the Task Force on Climate-Related Financial Disclosures, which is becoming one of the 4 common reporting frameworks. So climate-related risks and opportunities would include everything from resource efficiency, energy sources, access to new markets, regulations, transition to low carbon economy, and of course the physical risks of climate change. Climate risk management processes focus on the governance practices in place for all of the risks identified. The climate targets and goals include targets aligned to the Science-Based Target Initiative. So the proposed rules are not just asking for your targets and year-over-year progress, but they're asking for the year-over-year line-by-line spending to make progress towards these. So I think it was included to hold the companies accountable who are setting those aspirational net zero by 2050 targets, but very few companies actually have the power and the plans in place to do them. But on the other hand, I also think it's going to hinder other companies from setting less ambitious targets, like 10% reduction of emissions or things like that, because of the intensity of the data that they're requesting. The last major requirement is to explain the board and management oversight on climate-related risks. It's asking what are those conversations that are going on in the board and among the executive team to manage the climate risks. All of this is a huge task that requires expertise in the area, and current financial departments don't typically already have this in-house. So I also expect there to be a lot more collaboration between corporate social responsibility teams and finance teams to integrate all of this, since it does need to go into the financial annual reports. The final regulations are expected to be coming out in the next few months, so keep an eye out for that. If you're planning to apply for jobs, I think that'll be the perfect time. And when the rules go into effect depend on the size of your company. So it's currently for public companies, but I have been hearing about how it might impact private companies as well, and that their owners might be requesting this type of information. So once your company is ensured that you're in a good place in compliance and ready for the SEC regulations, a next good step would be to focus on quick wins and enablers. So this is getting an understanding of where the data is for your energy, diversity, training, whatever you decide is relevant for your company and you want to report on publicly from an ESG standpoint, you have to get the data collection processes in place. It's not as easy as emailing HR saying, how many hours of training did people do this year? There needs to be measures in place to be able to track this. These data will then become your baselines that you use for your year-over-year comparisons. So some examples of enablers could be forming new teams to drive initiatives, investing in data collection systems, or updating processes and policies that haven't been updated in a while. Once you have that strong base built with your quick wins, enablers, and compliance, it makes sense to progress into your strategic initiatives. So you can use the baselines that you just formed to predict trends and identify gaps. Another thing to consider is thinking about how to fully integrate CSR throughout the business. It's so easy to view CSR as its own silo and that it should live there on its own. But at the end of the day, the CSR processes are risk management and value creation opportunities. So it needs to be built into every department to the point that some of it can even run on their own. You also have to, like with any good strategy, make sure it's in line with the overall business strategy. If your company is, say, known to acquire a lot of companies, you may not want to set absolute reduction targets, but rather intensity targets. Or you are expecting a huge growth in your manufacturing company, selling more products means making more products, which means more energy usage. So you really want to think about what your company is planning to do and align with that. There's also so many things that you can do. So you really need to prioritize your resources and the projects based on things like return on investment, risk management, and the value creation potential. Most likely, by the time you wrap up your strategic initiative phase, things will change and you'll need to reevaluate where the program is and where it's going to go in order to develop the next strategic initiatives and long-term goals. So these may be dependent upon your business growth, new markets that you may have expanded to, and what resources are now available to successfully complete new initiatives. Our first year, we invested a lot in enablers and making sure we're meeting the relevant regulations. You can't just go out and say, we're going to accomplish all of this without having these processes in place. So for our department of 2, my boss and I have accomplished a lot. These are not even all of them, but these are important ones. And the CSR department at McKinnon has only formally existed for 2.5 years. So I'm not going to go through all of them, but I will highlight a few of my favorite and ones that I think are important to know about. So the first was developing green teams at our sites. We got our employees excited about environmental stewardship and taught them how to look for opportunities to minimize our impact on the environment. We have a designated site leader who's responsible for reporting all of the environmental data, and I meet with them both individually and we meet as a collective global team to talk about what they have going on at their sites and sharing opportunities and wins with each other. The other environmental strategy we put into place was reporting to GRI, SASB, TCFD, and CDP. I'll explain this more at the end, but it is important because these are ways to make sure our stakeholders are comparing apples to apples in terms of data. For social, we talked about how engaging your stakeholders to understand what's important to them is a main part of a materiality assessment. So one way we do this is through our annual employee engagement survey. So there are a bunch of questions to help understand employees' perspectives. So some of the many things that we ask are regarding how they feel, how the company treats its employees. Is there dignity and respect with that? Are they comfortable being themselves at work? And do they trust their immediate supervisor and manager? This sort of survey is really common for companies to do because it's a great platform for employees to speak up about things they may or may not like and suggest new ideas that may not typically make their way all the way up to the leadership team. For governance, we of course published our CSR reports. We have updated our enterprise risk management process and maintain a CSR website so it's easy and up to date for everyone to find information since we do only publish the report once a year. Managing the global green teams, I had mentioned this earlier, and they are an incredible group of people to work with. I will brag about them and talk about them all day long and in every situation. So we have our green teams at our sites, and like I said, it's a volunteer-based program that's responsible for promoting environmental stewardship and being creative as how in manufacturing we can minimize our negative impact and grow our positive one. So we expect at a minimum all of our sites, offices, and manufacturing sites to do some sort of environmental engagement event, and it's been very fun and successful. So these include everything from planting trees, doing beach cleanups, or taking field trips to a sustainable packaging company to learn new ways that we can ship our products. We focus on from them doing what's important to them and impactful to their local community. We have this two-way communication structure to keep it organic, but also to provide information from the core team to the sites for information on targets and company-wide initiatives like Earth Day. So if you saw on the previous slide, we have a green team logo. So we did that for Earth Day in 2021, where we had employees submit designs and everyone voted on which one was going to be the official one. We also did an environmental calendar where we had our employees' children submit drawings on what being green means to them. And then all of that went into our upcoming 2023 calendar. It just gets people more engaged and excited, and they're so proud when their kids win. Then the entire company is looking at their kids' drawing for an entire month. So to continue, every year, one of our sites wins the Sustainable Site of the Year award. It's very competitive and based on a lot of different factors. So this past year, our manufacturing plant in Charlotte won the award, which is the team on the left. Our other photos are of our Wisconsin site planting our trees and our Buffalo office after we hosted a park cleanup. So as a public company, our stakeholders are important to us. So they request a lot of information to make sure they have the same interests as the company. And a lot of these information requests now include information on ESG. So ever since Larry Fink, the CEO of BlackRock, said, hey, companies should be investing in ESG a few years back, the investors and lenders have been asking questions to help manage the risk in their portfolios. They come in different forms depending on who's asking. So a common one that I've been seeing a lot is EcoVadis, based on how standard it is, making it easy for the data requester to compare information from different organizations. Excel and Word are still the most common ones, since it can be customized to ask the direct questions that they need and only get the information that they really want to know. But there are other online surveys that data requests can come through as well. It really just depends on who's asking. So our stakeholders also provide feedback on our CSR report, which we always try to take into consideration when doing the next report. And they even propose initiatives for us based on what they see other companies doing. GRI requires a point of contact to be listed in the CSR report, which makes it very easy for stakeholders to reach out to the person or the people involved with developing the report. Since Scope 3 calculations are mostly based on assumptions, and with more companies having to disclose it because of the potential SEC regulations, I expect a lot more data requests in the near future from both upstream and downstream. So the suppliers, vendors, customers, to get the most accurate data. So also by getting this primary data, it can be easier to track reductions, which help when setting Scope 3 and net zero targets. So like I said, for Scope 3, we assume this is the emissions of our supplier. So we count that as our Scope 3, but you don't absolutely know. So when companies publish, these are my Scope 1 and 2, it makes it easier, and there's just more data out there for you to calculate it more accurately. So lastly, the last main part of my job is reporting to sustainability reporting agencies, frameworks, and standards. These are the 6 main organizations that Columbus McKinnon prepares information for, or that rate us based on the public information that we disclose. In our first 2 CSR reports, we reported to GRI and SASB through tables and information throughout the report. This was actually my individual capstone project, was putting together the GRI report, or the GRI index for the report. So GRI is a really common one that people use because it's pretty simple and straightforward. It is more general and applies to all industries on a high level. There are a set of disclosures a company is required to report on, regarding the general business, like the type of products and services they offer, where they operate. Does the report have any level of external assurance? What's the governance structure for overseeing the management of impacts? Then the reporting gets more specific based on what material topics are relevant to your organization. They kind of let you choose, and then they provide guidelines and requirements on what should be disclosed. You always have to have an index somewhere within the report to help stakeholders know exactly where in the report or other documents that these can be found. So GRI did last year announce an updated standard, which go into effect this January. So there's now the 2021 GRI standards compared to the 2016 one. I also did get my GRI professional certification in this, because I do this so much that having in the report that we have a GRI professional, certified professional reporting does add another level of validity to your report. SASB does get more specific and is based on your organization's industry. So from there, it tells you exactly what you need to report, and it can be presented through a table as well. These tables don't have to live in the CSR report. You can also have them as separate documents on your website if you want. It's real, or both. It really depends on what your organization wants to do. This is the first year that we reported to TCFD and CDP. So both were done after the report. So our TCFD report is now posted on our website. TCFD was formed to provide information to help investors understand the climate risks and opportunities in their portfolios and the companies they may be looking to invest in. And it's based on 4 recommendations. It's based on governance, strategy, risk management, metrics, and targets. CDP is an online questionnaire that gives us a score based on our measuring and action towards environmental impact. So this is done between April and July, and then sometime over the winter, they provide you with a score. So most people usually have a year behind when they do post their scores based on the timing of their rating. So our responses are posted publicly on the CDP website. They just got posted this week. And then, like I said, we'll receive our score sometime this winter when those come out. So it's long and comprehensive questionnaire, and it asks to disclose on everything from your governance, your risk, your opportunities, strategy, targets, emissions, energy, biodiversity. There's a lot of overlap between TCFD and CDP. So in addition to the frameworks that we report to, we're also scored through 2 sustainability organizations called Sustainalytics and ISS. Sustainalytics have their analysts go through our public information to rate us, whereas ISS, I have to go in and manually enter information that can be found in public documents. ISS tends to have a greater focus on the governance piece, whereas ISS looks more overall. So it's really, okay, there you go, sorry. So it's really easy to get overwhelmed by this alphabet soup that exists out there. But the biggest thing is to focus on what's important to you. So find the ones that are relevant to your organization, that your stakeholders are asking you to be rated by, and start there. As your program develops, you can always begin to report to new ones. So there are a lot of rating organizations out there, and it's really easy to chase scores, but you got to find the balance between having a bunch of scores out there and what actually adds value to the company and for stakeholders. So that is everything I have. I know I was shooting for 5:45, so I got really close to that. So thank you so much for having me. And are there any questions?